this is extremely thrilling to me to see this auditorium filled. I've met some of you. I haven't met a lot of you. I'm Jeff Shellen. I'm the chairman of the Broadcasting Board of Governors. The other fellow members of my board are up in the front row: Governor Weinstein, Governor Meehan, who I think had to leave, and Governor, obviously, Rick Stengel, who's the Undersecretary for Public Affairs, and a lot more words, which I don't remember in the title. This board took over about a little over a year ago, and we're committed to being a board that this organization can be proud of, like the work that all of you do. We had dinner with our panel last night, and I told them, and we all told them, how incredibly inspired we are by the work that all of you do and all the people that are watching this do around the world. It's not easy. We are not as well known. The work that we're doing in the United States is not as well known, and it's inspiring every day for me to read and watch and listen to the stuff that you guys do, and also to see so many people here today. Thank you all for coming. So we have tried every board meeting to convene some form of speaker or panel to teach us something and help us be a better organization. And one of the things that is interesting to me about the work that we all do is that it used to be, in the old days, when many of our organizations were founded, all we had to compete with was a state broadcaster. So we could just broadcast in the news and the journalism that we all do across whatever barrier there was, and we only had competition, these terrible state news services, and people would listen to us or watch us. And that's still the case, by the way, in a lot of places in the world. But in a lot of other places in the world, it's an incredibly asymmetric situation where you have lots and lots of media outlets and environments on lots and lots of different platforms, and you have lots and lots of different enemies who are not only enemies of the United States, but enemies to free press and freedom and human rights. And it's a much more difficult environment to broadcast in. I'm in the private sector in my day job, and I can tell you from that perspective, it's a much more difficult media environment. And then when you layer on the political situation, which is pretty complicated across the world right now, and you marry that to the media situation, the job that we have is incredibly complex. So one of the things we thought would be helpful was to try to get some of the people who have been successful in telling stories and engaging audiences around the world in ways other than news to come and tell us about how they do that and how they engage the audiences. So I spoke to my good friend Ben Silverman, former head of NBC News, creator of many, many shows that you guys watch but probably don't admit to it, like Biggest Loser. I do. And Ben said, I'm on it. I've got a number of friends who are committed to this, and we'll come help you guys out. So I want to thank Ben and thank the panelists for being here today. It's a great group of people, and without further ado, you guys don't want to hear any more from me. Let me turn it over to Mr. Ben Silverman. Ben, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Schell, and thank you, everybody from the board, all of the governors, and all of the incredible people who work here. It's been an exhilarating 24 hours for us already to get to connect with some of your partners and colleagues, and what an awesome thing you're doing, and the great institutions that you are supporting. And it's incredible as well to see what a group of Americans is here, representative of the world, which is what America's about. And I'm really, really happy to be here, as are all the panelists. It's an honor for us, in fact, to be here, and we hope whatever we have that we can share will be of value. But one of the things we're most excited about is learning more and more about what you do and seeing ways in which we can support your work and find ways to connect. And we had a really exciting time walking through the studios downstairs and seeing some of the various productions going on throughout the VOA network in Mandarin and others, and couldn't resist giving a couple notes like cut to camera 2, don't like the guy on the phone, can we lose that shot, little more color, less beige, but hey, that's what we do. And so really appreciative and excited, and hopefully we can give you some info. I want to introduce the panel, and then really get into a meaningful conversation about what we do, and hopefully there are elements of what we do and have done in our collective careers that can potentially benefit this amazing group. And in turn, at the end, we'll open up the floor to questions, anything that we can answer or help you with, we'd love to, and in return, we are committed to this for the long haul. We're not a group of people coming to DC today and then leaving in an hour after the meeting without an intent to return or continue this conversation. As I said to the Undersecretary and to the Chairman earlier, this is the beginning in terms of our hopeful relationship with you. So to that end, I want to introduce, starting on my near left, Frank Cooper, who is one of the greatest marketers I know. When the chairman asked me to put this panel together, I really wanted to bring a group of people who are representative of different elements of storytelling. And one of the things that we identify and see, and obviously with voice, is brand America. And Frank has been the steward of brand Pepsi and many of the brands within Pepsi. He's one of the most dynamic and smartest marketers I've ever met, but has been continually pushing Pepsi's thinking about what did they do to evolve to the same challenges that Jeff identified in getting their messages out and getting their messages heard and expanding how they communicate their messages, and also some of how it relates back to public policy. And I'll be fascinated to hear from Frank. And Frank also has a global role, which I think can really benefit us and his knowledge. Morgan Spurlock, and Frank, by the way, comes from an entertainment background into the marketing world, and as you'll see in the book, unbelievable track record and career, serially successfully. And Morgan Spurlock, who I've had the privilege of working with, one of the finest writer, director, producers in America today. You may be familiar with some of his films, including Super Size Me. You can still have a McDonald's, just don't have it 30 days in a row, like Morgan did, every single meal, as well as his work on CNN and his work as a producer and production company owner. And he really is a blend of both entrepreneurial, creative producer, and on-camera talent, and award-winning director, and I think will bring a tremendous amount, because if you've seen his films, he's always pushing a message through an incredible entertainment filter, and I give the mustache half the credit. And Soledad O'Brien, a 3-time Emmy Award-winning producer, documentarian, journalist, and on-air personality, who has worked across NBC and CNN and Al Jazeera, and has really done an incredible job promoting issues, promoting conversations. One of the things that Soledad and I talk a lot about is creating an environment for conversation and pushing conversation. And one of the things I've repeatedly heard as the greatest frustration when I'm talking to people who work in your wonderful organizations is when the walls go up and they won't give you accreditation, or the walls go up and they shut down the service, or the walls go up and they take you off air. And Soledad, in her work, is every day trying to promote conversations for people whose voices have had that happen to them, whether it's Blacks in America, Latins in America, or very pointed and specific storytelling engines. Charlie Corwin, who got promoted yesterday and is the chairman of Endemol North America, which is a joint venture between Apollo and 21st Century Fox, the Rupert Murdoch majority-owned studio. And Charlie was an entrepreneur as well, who sold his company to Endemol. Charlie is responsible for some of the finest television in history, including Ink Masters and Swamp People. He also, massive hits, but he also was an award-winning film producer, including movies like Squid and the Whale and Half Nelson. If you're familiar with those movies, 2 fantastic independent films, very well received. And in his new role as chairman, Endemol is the largest global production company in the world, and really has many parallel elements to what you do here. Charlie's entire business has different satellite offices, all with local managing directors and managing creative heads across the world, rivaling the bureau presence and distribution of your networks. And they each create ideas, share those ideas, and then as they identify ideas that work, they reskin them and replicate them globally. And some of those include American Idol, Big Brother, and others. And it's a real privilege and pleasure to have you here today, Charlie. Howard Owens, who was a former partner of mine and a co-founder of Reveille, our former studio production company, which we actually sold to Fox, and subsequently now is part of Charlie's Endemol Group. And after producing many award-winning television shows and building a massive digital business for Reveille and then Shine, afterwards he took a job running the National Geographic channels and moved to Washington, D.C. And in managing the National Geographic partnership, which is a not-for-profit, the National Geographic Society is a not-for-profit institution, DC-based, with a long heritage of very specific programming and messaging, and they made a partnership with the very commercial Fox Cable Group, which rolls up to Fox, 21st Century Fox, and I think there's a lot we can learn from what Howard did at National Geographic Channels, which had this hybrid issue of maintaining the integrity and the not-for-profit ideals of the National Geographic Society while ensuring that millions and millions and millions of people would see the shows so that they could sell advertising to afford to fund the shows. And I think that's something that this group has to manage all the time as it evaluates what it's doing. Okay, that's enough of me. So let's hear from the group, and thanks again. So Frank, I'm going to start with you here. As you're thinking about your messaging and what you build on a commercial platform, how do you integrate and think about Pepsi's public policy goals as you're developing or generating your brand messaging?
Yeah, well, look, historically, marketing and public policy operated on separate tracks. You know, you would have a marketing effort that people would deem purely commercial, and you would try to maximize your revenue through traditional means, primarily TV and radio, and then you'd have a public policy track that would operate out of corporate affairs and government affairs and sometimes the foundation. What we've seen, I'd say going back about 15 years and growing, is that consumers, they want social purpose built into the core of what the brand is. They want it to actually not a separate track or something that compensates for your core activity. They want it to be part of your core activity. And so what we've tried to do across as many brands as possible is to embed it in the core activity of the brand. A few years ago, I think it was 2010, we launched something called the Pepsi Refresh Project, and we said, okay, there's $20 million. We're going to push the power down to the community, let them decide what projects they want to promote to improve their communities, and we'll let them vote on it, and we'll help them execute. And that became an incredibly successful project because we saw 110 million votes, more than the election itself, which is kind of weird in itself. But 110 million votes, people were spending 20 minutes time on the site. But it was more a reflection of the brand was trying to evolve what it could be, that it's not just fun, it's not superficially engaged, purpose is at the core of it. And I think any lifestyle brand going forward has to have some component of that built into their behavior.
So you don't think that the public policy part, in fact, hurt the amount of people contributing or voting? It enhanced it.
I think you can. This kind of false dichotomy between public policy and the brand is starting to fade. It's already blurred, but those two will converge. I think that we're just in a period of time where people want objective truth, and they want truthfulness from brands and companies. And so, if we're in that period of time, and people are more empowered to actually ferret that out, you need to bring together in a holistic way everything that you're doing. You can't have a separate public policy, separate from your commercial activity, which is separate from your sense of social purpose. It all has to become one thing. What do you stand for within culture, and be consistent about that across the board.
And then as you're expanding on that, Morgan, as you're making films that have real specific social agendas to them, how are you ensuring that someone will pay for it because they think that someone else will pay for it.
Right.
And in turn, how do you wrap that message in entertainment, or where's the compromise there? Which do you start with first? I want to challenge a subject,
Yeah.
and then how do I tell it? Or
I mean, usually it starts with the idea. First off, we're storytellers. That's what we do. We are lucky to get to do what we do every day, to get to share stories with people all around the world. So it starts with the idea, and out of that idea, which what we've done is really built a business on influence media, on being able to create things that can shift perception or shift the way people look at certain topics. And for me, the key to creating anything like that is authenticity. It has to be authentic. It has to be authentic to your voice. It has to be authentic to the message, to the mission that you have. And within that message and that mission, it has to entertain people. So we have a mantra at our company, which is if you can make someone laugh, you can make someone listen. And ultimately, through humor, we attract a tremendous amount of people. We allow barriers to come down. We let people come into an entertainment world much more than I'm bringing you into a lecture. I'm bringing you into a news report. I'm bringing you into something that's entertaining first and foremost. And I think that changes everything. It changes the dynamic, and it changes your relationship with the audience.
And do you ever run up against anything where you go, oh, I went too far and I'm losing either the...
I don't think so.
the social message, or I'm going too hard and I'm losing the audience?
Well, I think it's a fine line. I think you have to start to determine, how far do you take something with humor but not lose the message? How far do you go with the message but don't lose the entertainment value? It is a fine line that you have to walk, and I think that we've been really lucky with the people that we've gotten to work with, the networks we've been in business with, production partners like yourself who've continued to support us and kind of not being afraid to experiment. I mean, that's the other thing is, we've been fortunate enough that we've been given the freedom to take risks. And that's the greatest thing. The greatest thing you can do is to push your boundaries and push the expectations that you even have of yourself to places you think you normally wouldn't go, to reach a broader audience. Because there's people that will always listen. There's a core group of people that will always be there to listen to you. And so you will always have those people. What you want to do now is start to push into the fray. You want to push just beyond that. How do I get the people who are circling around that group but aren't that group, friends of them, other people who are listening to like-minded channels or like-minded shows? How do you start to bring those people into your core audience?
And Soledad, you've recently launched Starfish, your media platform and production company. Is there a reason you went from your on-air and journalistic career and decided to expand into this longer form storytelling platform with your company?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not sure that anybody really in this audience could relate working for a big, giant bureaucracy like CNN. I joke, of course, but truly, there were stories that I felt should clearly be told with a point of view. One of the documentaries that will air on CNN in a couple of weeks that we're working on as one of our productions from Starfish Media Group is a documentary about black men and the police. Right? And you can't go into that documentary and say, listen, the police are here to serve you. It just won't work. It's all about really getting into authentic voices and authentic experiences, and then bringing them together along with the other voices to have this conversation. So you're really in the middle of a very accurate portrayal of an experience. That's not this and not this, but how people actually feel about what's happening to them, and undergirded by data and specifics and research, et cetera, but human beings' real experience, to me, is a thing that is sticky in storytelling. One of the reasons our Black in America series, I think we're on our 8th one now, has been so good because people say, that's my story, that is my story, and no one ever wanted to tell it. And for me, it was a little bit like hitting your head against a wall every time you wanted to repitch and repitch and repitch, when clearly it had been quite successful. So I think it was a really great opportunity to go and start something new, to own the content, to pick the partners who could leverage the work that you wanted to do, to bring the quality, certainly, but to really dive in and tell individual stories where people would say, I know what you do, I know the work you do, and I know you're consistent in what you do about hearing voices, even when those voices disagree with each other.
And Charlie, do you mind first just talking how Endemol works in terms of that scaled global creative mission at the core of the company?
Yeah, sure. Well, so the way that it works is it was founded 20 years ago by a guy named John Zamal, and what he did was he created a television format, what we call a format. In this case, it was Big Brother, and it was on television in Holland, and it was a hit in Holland. And he wanted to create this global company, and so he took that format, which was on air on a network in Holland, and he went to a lot of different countries around the world, and he said, you know, independent companies, and he bought them, and then he said, now make this format for your audience and put it on a network in your country. And so today, Endemol has hundreds of global franchise formats in both scripted and reality that we make in different countries around the world. The German version is all in German, you know, and so on and so forth around the world. So what we do is we get together, you know, once a month, all the managing directors of all the different territories, and we sit in a room. It's sort of like the United Nations of television, but less important. And we have a big screen at the front, and we show each other what's working in our territories, and we say, like, okay, well, what is at the core of that idea? What's universal that we can then redevelop and contemporize, recreate for a local audience in a different territory, and we share our ideas. So, you know, we speak in different languages sometimes between, you know, what you guys do in government and what we do in entertainment. You know, if you talk about emerging countries, we talk about emerging platforms. If you talk about counterterrorism, we talk about counter-programming. And, you know, we both have think tanks, and for real, we really do. We develop ideas for them. But at the center of all of it, really, is creativity and culture. And that I think is sort of the most important point for what I try to do at my company is to say, all right, how we all want reach, right? We all want as broad a reach as we can get. We also want depth, and that's kind of the cross section, reach and depth. How do we get that message to be sticky? How do we get it to really be impactful and to resonate? And you know, it really does come back to culture, right? So at my company, what I try to do is create a culture where the most creative and talented people who make this kind of content will want to come and work. So when I think about how that applies in your world, I think you have the greatest culture there is. It's, you know, American culture. And so how do you craft a message with the people who are really good at crafting it, you guys and anybody else, and then, you know, have that message extend and speak specifically to local audiences in different places?
And Howard, talk to us a little bit about managing the business you recently managed at National Geographic and the compromises that would have to be made and some of the good and the bad in terms of results that could come from that in being in this hybrid world of not-for-profit on one side and obviously very
Sure.
profit motivated on the other.
Sure. First, I just want to take a quick moment to thank all of you who work for the United States and our government. And we here on the panel are inspired by your creativity, your dedication, and your sacrifice. And walking in this morning and walking by a board of slain journalists slain in the line of duty really stopped me in my tracks and sent chills up my spine and made me realize that as much as I love the stories about what happens here and that it feels like a little bit of a spy novel to me, that this is the real world and what you do is incredibly important to all of us. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you because it means a lot to us on the panel here. We've learned a ton. At National Geographic Channel, where I started in 2011, I started there at a really interesting time. Because when the National Geographic channels were formed at the end of the 90s, National Geographic was in a very different place. They still had an incredibly healthy magazine business, and their traditional nonprofit businesses, which are about the world and everything in it, and preserving the planet that we live on, were thriving. And in the intervening, 10 to 15 years, the world's changed and the media market has changed. And there are tons of nonprofits now that specifically service, water and the importance of water and the importance of clean air and the importance of the Bengal tiger. And so their mission has changed, and they have become completely, in many ways, defined by the channels, which are a joint venture with Fox and National Geographic. And so there was a perceived schism when I went in there between the people who work at the channel and the people who work at the nonprofit. And even though I didn't believe the schism existed, I really didn't believe it, there was a perception that there was, and sometimes perception trumps reality. And the perception is that the people who work at the channel are kind of mercenary commercial, people who just want ratings and just want to create crazy, big shows, and that the people of the National Geographic Society want to change the world. And finding middle ground was incredibly important for me. And so going into National Geographic channels, I put an emphasis on creativity, under the belief that creativity is kind of what binded us together between the society and the channel group. And it really proved that the divide wasn't really there. That we did, we were simpatico in a ton of ways, and we achieved sort of the bonding of the channel and the society by creating things like Killing Kennedy, which we just received an Emmy nomination for the first Emmy nomination in the history of the channel, and things like Brain Games, which was a study of neurology and how the mind affects the way we act. And we did that show believing that the future of the National Geographic is about exploration, but not necessarily just about exploration of the real world, but about exploration of the metaphysical world and how we're going to explore new boundaries and new frontiers like medicine and neurology. And so we approached it that way, and I think it was a real win. And it's thinking about the future, and it's getting people inspired to work in a way that maybe they haven't in the past, but one that we share commonalities with moving forward. And that was kind of, something that I feel you guys are doing here.
Fantastic. And I'm going to make the next questions for the group because I think you can all bring different points of view. But one of them, as we're here in the building and looking at the tools that you use, and obviously we're living as content producers in this very aggressively, exponentially evolutionary marketplace where new mediums are being generated and new competitors are arriving on a day-by-day basis. As you're, any of you, coming up with the next idea, talk us through how you determine what medium that idea belongs on and how you approach your creative process tailored to your distribution process, i.e. internet, radio, digital, linear television, long form, short form. How does that work? I don't know who, Frank, do you want to start with?
Wow, I mean, it's complicated, but I think the simple answer for me is that mobile changes everything. If you look at, there's 5.5 billion mobile subscribers worldwide. By 2020, you'll have 3 times the smartphones as you do PCs. You layer that on top of that, what a mobile phone can do. It's frictionless access. It's with you all the time. People are using it somewhere between 100 to 150 times per day. It's there with you at the point of purchase. It's constantly feeding information to you. People will rather give you their wallet than their mobile phone. It's like deeply, deeply, deeply personal. And for me, that changes everything. But I think it's more than a delivery system. We kind of think of mobile as the 4th place. There's home, there's work, there's a social gathering like Starbucks or something. But then there's mobile. Everywhere you are, you create media. If you're in a store, that becomes the media for you. You're at an event, that becomes the place of media for you. And so for us, given that kind of proliferation of access, given that kind of intimacy, we're trying to shift to a mobile-first mentality. It doesn't exclude the other mediums, because the other mediums, they don't go away, and they actually serve a purpose. And if you want awareness, for example, it's hard to beat TV, particularly if you're paying for it, the CPM. But if you want engagement, where people are feeling some kind of intimate relationship with your brand, if you want advocacy, then it's hard to beat mobile. And so we're moving mobile first.
Yeah, no, for us, there are stories that are meant to be three or 5 minutes long. There's stories that are meant to be 45 minutes long, and then there's stories that should be 90 minutes long. And so one of it comes down to like, what is the story we're trying to tell, and where is it going? But coming off what Frank said, everything that we make now has a digital component to it, because you cannot ignore the fact that there are so many people who are consuming that level of content on the go, and whether that be on their iPad or on their phone. So we make sure there is an interactive process and a piece of everything, whether it be a feature-length film or a television show or a piece of digital content that can have a much longer tail, that can have a web that can go out and kind of reach those people, no matter where they're consuming content. I think it's important.
I would add to that a live element. Well, we've found tremendous success with doing all of the above and then saying, actually, we're convening a conversation. Latino in America is a tour where you can go and talk about your personal experience, because the idea is that you too if you're Latino, have a Latino in America experience that we're interested in. And then how do we capture that content? And how do we then leverage that content that we've captured into the next iteration? And maybe it's short web pieces. Maybe we pick the people whose stories are interesting and we go back and our next documentary relies on their stories. So you're constantly gathering and leveraging that content in multi-platform. Of course, for me, you want to have your documentary, if you're doing a doc or a series, air on television somewhere. It's an incredible stamp of credibility and approval. You need it to be mobile, because obviously a bunch of people are never going to see it on television. They're actually only going to see the 4-minute clip that you put online somewhere. And then you need them to feel like they could potentially be part of a greater conversation, because as a brand, you're saying, you matter. Your voice, your opinion, your perspective matters, and it doesn't matter if it's in complete contradiction to this person. We want to be the conveners of the conversation.
And another media platform that I know you're reliant on, driving and utilizing and working with, against, and all sides is obviously social media. And Charlie and Howard, with different perspectives, I was reading the social media ratings. There's now in the American television market, there's a new measurement, and it's how much engagement and noise are you making on the social media platforms. Typically, the big three, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, are the main drivers of that. But how, with Big Brother, which is the segue, on Top 10 and others, are you ever thinking social media first, show second? Are you always thinking, as you're generating show or content idea, about the social media? Do you think there is a connection?
We say it's the new water cooler. The conversation about the show itself becomes more robust on social media than it ever could have been before. And there are new metrics that are constantly coming out for how to measure something that is successful. How well, how many likes does somebody have? How many retweets did something get? So it's absolutely important. And what's interesting is I think where we're going with all of this sort of this technological tectonic shift that we're all in, it's happened before, and it'll continue to happen. We went from radio to television and to cable and to internet, and as these proliferations continue to happen, these concentric circles continue to go out, audiences become bigger, but you still, eventually where it's all going is convergence, right? So everything will be on your mobile, as Frank says. You'll be able to get anything you want. The kitten hanging from the branch will be right next to Avatar. You just be able to pick and watch anything you want, anytime you want. And so really, in anticipation of that convergence, it's our responsibility to be everywhere. We want to be reachable for all people. And to Morgan's point, that might not mean the same piece of content goes to every single place. But we want co-viewing. We want people to engage in our ideas and our stories from different places and different entry points on different devices all the time. What's interesting about the digital platform, the social media platform that you brought up, Ben, is that right now it's a young medium. But we are in a content phase within that medium, having figured out infrastructure problems and bandwidth problems, having figured out a little bit, monetization even is a word we use that we don't really love, but we use. It's like the connection between the revenue model and the medium is starting to connect, right? But now we're really in the premium content phase of that, right? How do we tell a story digitally? How do we tell a story on Twitter and Facebook and other social platforms so that we engage these audiences? You know, it's one thing to be viral, to be shareable. You know, you drop a Mentos in a Coke bottle and 1 billion people watch it. Okay, great. That's great. How do we tell them a story now? How do we give them something that they don't yet know they want?
And to that point, it's how we create content now, and for what platform we decide that the content should exist on, oftentimes is informed by how we utilize social media, how we use new media to get the message out there. Soledad and I collaborated on a program this past spring called Live from Space, and it was an association with National Geographic and NASA. And the touch point around it is that we wanted to create a program that could highlight Cosmos, which was coming out on the National Geographic channels, and we wanted to appeal to that audience. Knowing we wanted to reach that audience, we came up with a show that we thought was really cool, which is following the International Space Station live on a complete orbit around the Earth. The message was also, we think space exploration is cool, and we think NASA is, you know, more people should know about the incredibly interesting things they're doing. In creation of that program, we created an incredible app, and we did the traditional things that you need to do today to be in the mind of media consumers. But also, we had a little tricks and bells and whistles. We tweeted, we did the first live tweet from space. It was a little hook, but it garnered a ton of attention. We also piggybacked, we use National Geographic assets, which we do all the time for our programs, but we piggybacked into NASA's, with NASA's social media assets. And we use their Twitter platform, and we use their Facebook platform, and their Instagram platform, and we got the message out there. And we told this story in a very multidimensional way, and it helped the success of the program. And it's how we think about developing content for today and tomorrow.
I want to add one last thing to what Howard was saying. And probably not the best thing to support or say on an entertainment panel, but as a doc filmmaker and storyteller, I am also incredibly pro-piracy, because if you are going to take the time to download a documentary and share it with anyone, God bless you. But I can't tell you, like when I was in the middle of Riyadh filming, Where in the World's Osama bin Laden, and a woman came up and said to me, she goes, that episode of 30 Days that you did where the Christian lived with the Muslim was one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life. I shared this with so many of my friends, and I downloaded off Pirates Bay, but I hope you don't mind. And I was like, please, share it with everybody. But moments like that, and where you guys deal with a situation where people don't have access to content or get shut out, things like that are invaluable and are so important to reach an audience that normally wouldn't have access to what you do. So for me, I find it as being, there is an asset to that level of reaching people who don't have the ability to hear certain voices. And I think that it's an important part of the stories that I tell, because they do get locked out of a lot of places.
I was thinking just about that too. It's I was thinking right at the top. I'm like, well, this is a group that because you're giving away the content for free and encouraging, would actually greatly benefit from BitTorrent, Pirate Bay, and all the groups that normally in our day jobs we're fighting against, because somehow they're figuring a way to stay on. The culture and the community is willing to kill for another episode of The Simpsons, but they're slowly allowing their news services to be encroached on. And it's a really interesting dynamic. Go ahead, sir.
No, I was going to say, this is where Maura and I, we're aligned again. I'm pro-piracy too. Share.
I'm leaving.
To a certain extent. Look, for us, Nirvana
See the
is...
fake Pepsi can outside?
See, that's why I said to a certain extent. To a certain extent. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with the globe. But look, to a certain extent I am, because I think we know we can't afford to pay the distribution costs for all the advertising across the globe. It becomes unaffordable at a certain point. And so you have to create content that people want to share. Right. You have to create that kind of content. And so we're moving more aggressively toward that idea of creating content that people want to share. And for me, the analogy to what BBG does and Radio Free and Voice of America, we're a brand, and we do sell a product, but at the end of the day, we actually are trying to sell a brand. And we want people to pay a premium. And you ask, why does someone pay $300 for a jacket that should probably cost $50? And normally it's the backstory. And so what we're trying to do is create those backstories. Sometimes we'll do it in long form, but I'm telling you, increasingly, it is short form. And I'm surprised by it, but I'm excited by it. I'm surprised that Vine, people can actually tell a story on Vine that makes sense to someone, 6 seconds. Instagram, people actually can tell a story. Snapchat, people do a My Story, video that actually is meaningful to people. But that should be exciting to everyone because the power is getting pushed out to people. You just need to know how to leverage it and deliver it to them in a way that they want to share it.
And are you seeing that from a demographic shift too? Is it two different communication tools for two different generations, or?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the country, but look, age, gender, income, location, ethnicity still matters to a certain extent, but I think increasingly life stage matters. What life stage are you in and what are you struggling with? I think increasingly cultural groupings matter. I did a conference one time where I had Snoop and Puffy on there.
That's
Snoop Dogg.
Snoop Dogg.
And
Puff
and
Daddy. You don't want to be too inside Hollywood, first name only, but
Snoop Dogg and Puff Daddy. Sean Puff Daddy Combs. Honestly, I brought them on for the sizzle. I didn't think they would actually deliver the substance, but they said two things that actually changed
they
profoundly.
didn't vet the chairman's requirements.
Exactly. But it changed, exactly.
The no smoking
Yeah,
policy.
it changed, it changed profoundly how I thought about branding. So what Puff said about hip hop, he said you can think about hip hop any way you want to, but at the core of it, the reason it spread so rapidly is that it tells people how to deal with struggle. You think of everyone who's been successful in hip hop, they're really telling you a story about how to deal with struggle. And so young people have felt that and they've embraced that. And Snoop said something I thought it was interesting. He said, I asked him, how did you last 18 years in a business that churns out people every 18 months? And he said, what I do is, a lot of stars stand up on a pedestal and they look down on their fans. What I do, I pull them up on the pedestal with me. I try to empower them, and that's changed my whole relationship with that consumer base. And so I think brands need to think about it in that way. How do you empower people to deal with the things that are most important to them? Struggling, getting through, overcoming it, but also empowering them, lifting them up.
And Soledad, as you are now, because you're not only behind the camera, you're obviously very in front of the camera, are you seeing the media transformation transform your ability to talk to your audience? Do you know your audience better today than you did when you started?
I love it. I love being able, I'm a fighter, so I like being in really fierce debates with people on Twitter. It's one of the most enjoyable things. And as soon as you do an interview, if you're doing a live show, or being able to pick up on someone's conversation and jump into a conversation pretty much with anybody, anywhere, is so incredibly powerful. And sometimes when we would do our Black in America series, someone would tweet, well, girl, you're not even black. Right, and that would start this incredible debate about race in America and what does it mean to be black. And actually, we ended up taking the concept to do the next doc about, well, where do we get our idea about race? And so, but because it was such an intense debate on Twitter around this issue, that it was really stunning. So sometimes it just gives you great ideas, and people know that they're. Well, first they say, is this really you? And then once you get through that, then they realize they are having an argument with you. And even if you disagree, they feel like I was able to access and engage in this person who's on the front line of this conversation. I love it. I think it's incredibly powerful, and people who are not leveraging that the right way are really missing an opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity.
And I think that's a point also, that the talent and your broadcasters and the on-camera, on-radio, on-air people that you're building, growing, supporting, and become more and more important as this transformation continues, because they're the ones who can be, as Soledad is, on that front line of engagement and conversation. Charlie, from a global perspective, how do you think about culture in distinct, specific culture? We were talking about the American culture, but obviously this room is a world culture, and the expatriate element and the foundational piece of the broadcaster's mission to be representative and of the community, not to the community, is so important here. How do you instill that in Endemol? How is it possible that you guys can get a show started in Saudi Arabia, being a Dutch-started company, sold to a Spanish phone company, now merged into an American studio, yet what's happening in Riyadh is born of and for Riyadh. And either how does the culture from Los Angeles and Amsterdam and London not kill the culture or overlay it? And in reverse, how do you tap into that culture to feed your other partners?
I mean, the simple answer is, it gets complicated, of course, but the simple answer is just people. It's just, boots on the ground. It's eyeball to eyeball. It's being there and having local managing directors in those different territories who we have an ongoing conversation with about what the audiences in their territories are responding to, what's working. The nice thing about the interactivity that that media has evolved into is that you get just a tremendous amount of feedback from people, and you can use that feedback to try to develop something specifically for them. So what we do is we just do the work. We talk to each other a lot. We have boots on the ground in those countries, and we develop ideas and figure out what they're responding to and what they aren't. And what ends up happening is you have these interesting, like, for instance, a lot of formats that have become
Formats are when we talk about a show like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the first episode of that you see, the format of the game show is what we're talking about when we say format. It's the kind of foundational elements that make the television show. It is the format of the television show. That's what we...
Yeah, I mean, to take, for example, so Israel had a lot of big formats that are working in America have actually begun in Israel. For some reason, certain people felt like the taste of audiences in that country was somehow simpatico to the taste of American audiences. So a show like Homeland, which actually was a show called Prisoner of War, started in Israel, or a show like Rising Star, which also started there. But there are a lot of countries. Ben's made a bunch of shows from Argentina and other countries in South America that started there as telenovelas, which he recreated for American audiences. So it's really about starting with that idea and then seeing how it can be redeveloped for a particular audience. And usually those shows end up looking far different than they did in their original countries, as they should.
And I think that's something that we've all participated in. We were having a really incredibly dynamic and awesome conversation with many of the individual broadcasters. And I'm looking at a lot of the faces from last night who really energized our group with their intelligence and commitment. And one of the things is, scaled ideas. How do we scale ideas? Here you're scaling the idea of democracy, of America, of transparency, of openness, of just let us in the door and you guys have the conversation. How do you scale that idea? How do you replicate it? And one of the things that we would say is find good partners. We've all worked together from different seats because we are in a forced collaborative medium. But in that conversation and talking to John at Radio Free Europe, we were talking about different ideas, and we were talking about Pakistan and a lot of the difficulties that obviously everybody in this room who touches that country faces in getting the messages out. And Frank came over, and we were talking about this idea of formats. And why don't you just talk about what the company did in Pakistan with X?
Well, I mean, throughout the Middle East, and you guys know this very well, you have a young population that wants to be engaged.
And Pepsi, de facto, I mean, you can speak, is and it may be harder, is the leader there because they're not Coke a little bit. It's like Coke's the man, Coke's you guys. Okay, but even though they're both red, white, and blue,
it's true. It's true. I mean, look. I mean, if you think, it's just true. So we use. So if you think about Pepsi versus Coke, I'll just really quickly, and you guys probably all know this. So Coke, what makes Coke really, really powerful? Coke has always been about that feeling of being empowered today, the feeling of embracing what's in front of you, the status quo. It's Coke and a smile. We give you that little lift. They've always been about that. They've been about a moment of happiness, and that's a powerful thing. That's a hard thing to beat. We've always been about the spikes of joy. So if you think of them as a steady state of happiness, we're the spikes of joy. We're about the feeling of being alive. We're about change, about pushing things forward. So we've always had those kind of polar positions, and we just try to play it out. And so if you look to the Middle East, where we sponsor Arab Idol, The Voice, and X Factor, you can't do that in the U.S., but in the Middle East, we sponsor all three throughout.
But they're getting all three into those markets, and those shows all sell the American dream. I mean, that's what those shows are selling every day, and they're happening because of Frank and Pepsi. They're not happening because the local broadcaster wants to just fund them.
And it's allowing people to be involved in selling that American dream, right? So the winner is ultimately decided by the people.
Engaged, right? They're voting on it.
They're voting on it. They're promoting them, and they're speaking in social media about it. And so that's where it becomes really powerful, because the other forms existed before. We knew Battle of the Bands early on in the day. We knew Star Search, and fast forward to American Idol and X Factor and The Voice. That's where you have this deep participation from the audience, and that's what changes everything.
And they're doing, to them specific, they're doing X Factor in Pakistan. So I think, opening up the collaborative conversation as it's possible, and the board and everybody in the room continues to evolve and change. Part of that might be like what Howard did in the public-private cooperation, because there is this great intellectual property that does have representative goals and ideals that are totally consistent and on message for what you're all working on and trying to accomplish. And the way into the market may be with somebody you didn't realize was the best partner, and it's Pepsi, or somebody else who wants to be associated with the same message and ideals. And that's something we just say to you, we're open and excited and eager to be engaged and work on. Another big thing that we talked about with the group and was so happy, and Libby was so passionate, and others about, was change. This idea of change, and how do you face change? And one of the points that we have to deal with and look at and find day to day, 9 out of 10 things we do fail. Every day, I have met many of you and have heard about my failures from many of you. There's not a lot of people who have publicly had to fail as much as people like us. And I can tell Morgan his bad box office score and his good box office score. I avoid the bad, we're friends. But that kind of constant failure creates daily evolution for us and daily change. And you're playing a much longer game. You have a much longer mission and a much longer game, even though there's such a forced reactive pressure to you guys to what happens inside a market. We were talking about the Ukraine. We were thinking about leaving the Ukraine. Oh my gosh, we're now all in back. And that kind of thinking happens all the time in our world, and how we could encourage you to push that culture of change and evolution, knowing that the failures may not be as public, but not being afraid of them. And that's something we all got thick-skinned about, because we knew that without those failures, we weren't going to evolve, learn, and shift. And all of us who've been reactive, all of us who woke up to ratings, in our case, the absolute ratings that come out and tell you 4 million people watch your show and 20 million people watch the other show you were trying to compete with, AKA you're dead in the water. Hearing that information in the morning, it plays out of something that was put into action probably 18 months to 2 years prior, anticipating a marketplace opportunity, and finally has gotten into the market, and that market has changed. The other thing that would be as dangerous is to reacting to your failure and curling up in a ball and quitting, would be reacting to the success of the 20 million people who watched the other show and deciding to do the same thing they did because it worked, because you have to remind yourself again, that began 18 months to 2 years ago, and you have to be 2 years ahead of the cycle, not just derivative. And that's something that we're all constantly playing with. And I don't know how you break out into your creative forums or your versions of your internal think tanks, but it's something I would say you should challenge each other on the way that we challenge each other on, and face that failure constantly. And Soledad, as somebody who's pushing agenda through journalism, in a room full of journalists who are pushing some agenda, but quietly, but transparency. How do you not risk alienating somebody because you are bringing this point of view? You're not leaning back and saying, I don't want to create this conversation. You're saying, we need this conversation. How do you not alienate?
I think it's about back to the American brand. For me, the American brand is actually all about that long arc of justice. So you can tell stories of where America struggled, right? Where we did not necessarily do it the right way. Working on a documentary now about those veterans who finally were awarded the Medal of Honor, but they were overlooked for very tangible reasons. They were discriminated against for religious reasons, for racial reasons, for ethnic reasons. And you can tell an incredibly heroic story about those people where America got it wrong because of what was happening historically, but we understand as Americans that the goal is that justice comes through at the end, that you hope that you're getting to a point where people are eventually treated equally, that people's, that what is truth does emerge. And so sometimes that conversation is a challenging and uncomfortable and difficult but honest one. And by being honest, you are vulnerable and you open people up to saying, I understand this side. I have lots of debates in my family. My mother's Cuban. She grew up in Havana. And my dad's Australian. And when I go to Cuba to see my cousins, my uncle believes that in America, the streets are literally paved with gold. And my cousin believes that in America is a terrible place where all the black people are in poverty and it's a horrible place and everyone should, and you have to sort of navigate like, well, some of this is true and some of that is true. And you're debating this. We're not perfect, but here is where we're perfect and here's where we want to go. And that is what makes America great, that we can have this conversation. To me, that is part of the American brand that it really, I think, transcends, right? Is why people come to this country, because they have that opportunity and that journey can exist.
Great.
Great, that was great, Soledad. So I want to leave time. We have a ton of people in here to leave time for questions. We've got about 20 minutes left. So why don't we open up for questions? I've got a bunch, so if anybody here is not great. This is a room full of journalists, though, so I imagine there's some questions in the audience. So anybody has questions, Ben, why don't you MC from up there? Oh, you got it? Yeah. Excellent. Over here to the...
What about,
Can you stand up and
yes,
say your
of
name?
course. I'm Rosemary Reed from a local production company, R Productions. And my question is, what about the digital divide? Because there are many people that do not have access to all these brands and all these, opportunities that you're talking about.
Well, I think that's where mobile also.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the great news of mobile. If anything's going to close the digital divide, it will be mobile. And if you look at Africa right now, even though the smartphone penetration hasn't really crossed the threshold, everyone has a phone. Text messaging works in virtually every area you can think of. MTN continues to expand its footprint, within Africa. I think mobile will be the answer to closing the digital divide. It won't be a PC, and we all thought it would have been PCs at first. Good friend Nicholas Negroponte did the one laptop per child, and he had that idea, and it was a brilliant idea. But many countries are going to leapfrog right over the PC, and they're going straight to the mobile phone. And I think that's the pathway to closing that divide.
Why don't we go, we'll alternate sides right here.
Hi, I'm Tatiana Anderson. I'm with El Hura TV. I'm a producer in our Springfield bureau. And I have a question for you guys. You talked a lot about the importance of taking risks and pushing the boundaries, and I think all of us in this room think that's incredibly important. However, the countries that we broadcast into, doing that kind of thing may present a risk, whether it's to a journalist, whether it's to a source, whether it's anchoring a government to the point where it impacts our broadcast. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us about how we can tell those stories, how we can still make that difference, but deal with that dichotomy at the same time. Any thoughts you have would be wonderful. Thank you.
I'd love to address that one. In creating The Biggest Loser, we were talking about this. If we had called it the sweet lose weight over 9 to 10 months show, and you may actually put the weight back on after the show stops taping, see you at 8 p.m. on Tuesdays at NBC, instead of calling it The Biggest Loser, which we were the first day that we announced the title, I remember reading some Variety article or something, The Biggest Loser, Ben Silverman, or something like that. Of course, that's the title you call to just get, to kill yourself with. But where I'm going with it is, we needed something angular. We needed a name that had an edge to it, because in fact, the show, through emotion and storytelling, was going to hopefully get people to participate and want to improve their lives by eating better and working out harder. And that kind of creative algorithm and coming up with what's the title that we could draw in with, what's the poster we could get attention to, but making sure that what was inside it couldn't be challenged deeper in terms of its integrity and the ability to really do something positive. And I think for you, thinking about those hooks that don't endanger your mission and endanger your people, but still can grab audience and then tell the story you want to tell, is a kind of thought process that probably needs to continually refresh. And we met with a gentleman who had been involved with the Burqa Star. Is it Burqa Star? Burqa Avenger. Of course, everything's a star in our world. But the Burqa Avenger program. And I remember reading a New York Times article about it, not realizing that the group here and American support had made it possible, and wanted to find the guy who had been involved with it, because I thought it was something that could translate, and he was a real interesting creative person, and maybe there was opportunities to do work here. But that kind of concept to me was so, just calling it Burqa Avenger, it just opened up so many things. But then when you watched it, it was celebrating women in burqas, and it was celebrating part of this man's culture and his relationship to these women. Yet quietly, it was empowering women, and it was empowering girls, and it was empowering people. And so that kind of thing, which you guys did, feels like an awesome template for what you can do. And we're always thinking about that. You can't call it homework. You can't call it public diplomacy. You can't tell somebody it's good for them, because they won't eat it, and it'll all feel like spinach. You gotta wrap those. I'm doing it with my own kid now. I'm serving him vegetable versions of everything. My wife and I are cutting everything into a vegetable version of what's really bad for him. They're not really French fries, they're veggie fries.
Another way to take risks and ensure take strategic risks and calculated risks is to partner. And we talked about that earlier. But when you're in countries and you're in places that are resistant to messaging that you want to get across, when we are in that role, when we're making shows at National Geographic about digging or about the ocean or about exploration, I'm always looking. There's always going to be controversy. We do tons of work with the American Archaeological Association and with NOAA. And when you're looking to break new ground, I look for partners that give me support, give me balance, give me security in the arena that I want to get in. And that's something I think you guys probably traditionally do well and want to keep doing, and want to keep getting that support and giving yourself that insurance policy and making it, bulletproof.
I don't think risk has to be physically risky and dangerous for journalists. I think
probably is in some of these places.
Well, but I mean, I don't think sometimes when we talk about risk, right, it's going with just a different idea. One of the ideas that we fought the hardest for was a documentary we did for a Latino in America doc, and we pitched the story of a female boxer, a Tex-Mex girl. And people were like, well, girls boxing, and who's going to, and it was so much work, but it ended up being a story about immigration, about the American experience, about Mexicans' values in America, because the Olympics was going to allow boxing for the first time for women. And so the woman we profiled would go on to win a medal and be the first American to medal in boxing. But it was a non-traditional, it was just thinking differently about how do we tell this story in a way. And the risk was in people throwing you out of the office, saying, oh, nobody wants to see girls. No, we don't want to do that. I mean, that was probably one of the hardest things to pitch and win that pitch on.
And sometimes I think the risk goes beyond content itself. You can the risk that you can take, I think with little impunity, is a risk in how you operate. So if you know, why not have a point of view, as Soledad said? Why not deliver short form content wrapped in entertainment? Why not empower people to actually contribute to the quote unquote news? There's modes of operation that you can change. The way you deliver it, the way you invite people in, the way you create the storyline, the story arc, making it nonlinear, that will be very different from what you do today. And that feels like a risk because it upsets the normal processes of operation. And trust me, we understand that because we have a large organization that became iconic in the 20th century. So we have an ecosystem built around that. But everything else is changing. Everything is changing. Social institutions are changing, culture is changing, consumer behavior is changing. I think changing your mode of operation is riskier to stand still than it is to change the modes of operation.
And I also add one thing to that, just to Soledad's point and to Howard's. Like, there's something we in our business call packaging, and it's sort of like about, to your point about partnering, it's about who do you put around that idea, right? And to your point about the difference between information and entertainment, and can you encapsulate an important message in something that feels like entertainment, so that it's not as as difficult to get across and as dangerous to actually put out there. It's not saying it's hard news. And then can you attach to it, again to use our words, can you attach to it a producer, a director, someone in front of the camera who actually has credibility with that specific idea and to that specific audience? And those are both ways to kind of to get across that.
Thank you. I'm Alberto Pimienta with the Spanish service here at VOA. My question is for Ben, for Morgan, and for Soledad. I mean, and then if the rest of the panel wants to say something about it as well. How do you make sure that people around the world are going to be interested in something like Supersize Me, something like Black in America, something like The Biggest Loser, which is really popular in Latin America, those kind of shows? How do you make sure people are going to be interested? How do you make sure that they're going to listen to the story, a U.S. story? How do you make sure that's going to happen?
I mean, for me, the biggest thing is creating entertainment first. I mean, you want to tell a great story. You want to make sure that, one, the root of your story, whatever that is intact. You want to make sure that it's true to you and true to your voice. And then you want to make sure that it's going to be entertaining. We could have made a movie about obesity in America that was just this incredibly dry thing, but instead, I subjected myself to an absolutely terrible diet that no one should ever do. But that was a hook that really brought people in, and I took you on this vicarious journey with me. And that type of kind of immersive journalism is what I've continued to do up till now, because I believe there's a trade-off that I take you on. When I take you on this journey, when I learn something, you learn something. When I feel something, you feel something. There is a trade-off between me and an audience that happens. And so I think that relationship, and that's what you start to build, as Soledad has done, you start to build a relationship with people who watch what you make, and they trust in that message and they trust in what you do. The other thing that we did, is the question is, how do you start to make things that people normally wouldn't want to watch or wouldn't want to know about interesting? Like, how do you suddenly make things that are typically very boring something that could be engaging? We just did a project that launched last week with Paul Allen called We the Economy. The economy is a very boring thing. Nobody wants to talk or read about the economy. But what we did is, as they were talking about packaging and partnering, we got people like Adam McKay, who did the movie Anchorman. We got John Chu, who did G.I. Joe. We got Mary Harron, who did American Psycho. We got some of the greatest directors in the world to do 3 to 8 minute films about different aspects of the economy that now millions of people all across the country are watching. We took things in a very different direction than you would typically expect, to see around a topic. And I think there are ways, again, to take risks that aren't dangerous but are just different, that could be fun, that are entertainment based, where you could really kind of create a much larger footprint.
And U.S. News actually asks itself that same question, but in reverse, right? Like, how do I make this story that's unfolding in Haiti interesting to Americans? How do I make this story matter about the economy? How do I do that? So I think it's about universal truths, right? The reason you care about the aftermath of an earthquake in a country where you don't know anyone and you probably will never go visit is because you're watching these stories unfold that are about life and dreams shattered and goals and hope and all those sort of bold-faced words that will all be appearing in the 2016 election cycle, I'm confident. Because those are the universal truths that make us human. And so we do care, and our hearts are yanked. So you go through those things. Anytime I see any story, where a mother and a child are in some kind of relationship, whether it's a loving one or one that's full of tension, it's like, oh, I'm right back to my own kids and my own experience, even if I'm watching it and it's in subtitles and I don't understand the language. So I think it's about finding universal truths that matter to people, and that's how you sell it. But it's not about saying, this is very important for you to understand this issue, ever. It's just this is a story that will rip your heart out, and it means something. And you're going to care regardless of who's in it, what language it's in, regardless of what's it about. One interesting thing, when we did our documentary about colorism for Black in America, I had a massive number of Asian women who reached out to me, Indian women who all said, oh my God, colorism is such an issue in our country. We have this debate all the time about value plus skin tone. And it was amazing to me, the number, and it was a conversation that they never had in their own culture, so they had to watch a documentary that was basically titled Black in America to finally have an honest debate about how we value people depending on their skin tone and what are the historic roots of that. That really surprised me.
Hi, I'm Monty Hatcher, art director here at Voice of America. This question's for Howard. At National Geographic, what were some of the keys to getting people to think and act in ways that were relevant to a changing consumer environment, given that their focus for so long was just on the magazine?
Thanks, Monty. It's a great question, and one of the keys to getting us to think and act as a team with a uniform mission was to outline what our mission was in a clear and articulate way. In a changing media landscape, often the gut instinct, and our instinct, I think, was to do 100 things, or tons of things, to do a ton of, to try to make shows in a lot of different areas of focus, and to try to reach the consumer by sort of extending ourselves in a way that did not foster, kind of allow us to tap into our sweet spot, and the sweet spot for the National Geographic brand. So one of the things that we did to get everyone sort of on the same page was to very clearly delineate what our mission was and what our brand was. And we clarified it to, we believe that the National Geographic Channel, our internal mantra, was to reach out and tap into the explorer in all of us. And we did that through upscale, intelligent, entertaining programming. But it was really, if the shows, and I felt to give us a lot of bandwidth and a lot of runway, but if the show wasn't in some way, shape, or form about exploration, and if it wasn't smart, and if it wasn't insightful, and it didn't have an element of aspiration that was overt, we stayed away from it. And I know it sounds simple, but having and it went a little deeper than that, but having a brand mantra was something that everyone in the organization, from assistants to directors to producers to everyone, they kind of knew when they were working on onlining programming, when they were working on the off-air, the on-air architecture, when they were working on different elements of getting National Geographic to air, we kind of all knew what our mission was, and it helped to inspire people and make people feel they were part of the team, and that was helpful.
So Ben, we have time for one more question, and I'm going to take it. Is that right? It's the prerogative. So you guys, I'm going to meld two things that you guys have said in the last hour together. One, by the way, you're all very creative people. We can see that today, and thank you for being with us. But two, I think everybody up here has talked about partnerships in one way or the other, partnering in different bases. So kind of as a way of giving some final advice to the people here in this room and the people watching on the webcast, what thing comes to the top of your mind if you had to pick one thing? You'd spent some time with us last night, you spent some time this morning. What thing comes to mind that you say, God, I'd like to go out and partner with you, the BBG, in this thing, in this part of the world, and collaborate on this thing, totally off the top of your head? So Ben, why don't you start?
For me, it'd be some of the longer form entertainment narratives that are representative of the American ideal. We have a huge opportunity together, our franchise in Hollywood and New York would, to generate and deliver in partnership with you creativity that matches your goals. When I hear women's issues and women's empowerment as a central tenet of what needs to be pushed through the system, I think about Betty LaFea, a show that I did, Ugly Betty, and that aired all over the world and was replicated all over the world and had a simple message of it doesn't matter what you look like. And inside that kind of storytelling, I would have loved to have started that process in the fantasy of where, you know, this business expands as you have to find new ways in, because you don't need to wrap that in the American flag. You don't need to wrap that in an American brand. It is an American brand, but it's a world brand. And so those kind of things would be things that I would love to find ways to partner with, and our group would love to invest time and energy against.
Yeah, for me, it would be short form video and interactive experiences. I think there's an opportunity to partner and find, you know, that next generation of storytellers that can help amplify the stories that you want to tell. But I also think there are ways to say gamify some of the experiences. We did a project with Forrest Whitaker called Democracy on Mountain Dew. And we basically we created a gaming kind of platform. We let consumers come in and they create the next Mountain Dew. It became the most successful thing we've done in 15 years in terms of sales. If you can do that with a soda, if you can do that and get that kind of participation on that brand, just think about what you can do, or things that are really kind of important to people's lives on a daily basis, but also long term. So I think gamifying some of the experiences and then opening up short form video, you know, with a particular point of view. I think I would love to talk about partnering on that basis.
Yeah, the thing that I got excited about, like I'm platform agnostic. I like to make content wherever we can make great content and reach an audience, long form, short form. The thing that got me excited last night when we were talking, I was talking to Brian about the Middle East, is I got excited about Ramadan. Ramadan being the time when like the entire Middle East is watching television and they are all coming home, and it becomes an event. It is like one of the greatest like times to create event television, and it's something that you know, as we talked, he says we've never tried to make a push into that world and do something that could reach such a broad audience. And for me, to create something where you could make something that is really noisy and big and really plant a flag that could be multi-platform, where it could go from television to digital to interactive. I mean, I think there is a magical, amazing opportunity there that just got me giddy. So I would jump at the chance
I also
to
have
help.
to say, I keep looking at your warrior poets. I'm like, we're in the room of the warrior poets.
That's right. We are.
As someone who runs a production company, I'm always looking for great opportunities to partner, and I'd be remiss if I didn't use your partnership question to really say to the people assembled here, you are the brand promise for BBG, right? Ultimately, it's your passion, it's your interest, it's your goals, it's the fact that you are willing to see that the road that you are going down is not going to be, hey, by next year or 18 months, but a really long process of committing to a region, to telling stories. I think that's an amazing calling. I mean, as journalists, right? It's an incredible calling to want to do that. And so I would say, I think, you know, the partnership for me is about working with people who are passionate about stories and committed to figuring out how to get in and tell those stories and connect with people and move the needle in some way. I think that's a journalist's gig, ultimately. I think it would be, you know, the actual specifics of what you do in some ways is a secondary. It's the idea of believing in a community many of you I know have left places, and you're still committed to the people there and telling their stories. That's an amazing thing. That's an amazing thing.
Yeah, for me, I think it would be to find ideas that leverage the nexus between old and new media. And what I mean by that is that we've created a digital network in my company where we've signed up all these digital stars, YouTube stars, other people that have these massive audiences, and they're global. And taking traditional media stars and trying to enlist the new media stars to leverage their power and reach their audiences and tell stories in a way that can really, you know, transcend geographic borders. You know, we have someone we just signed a deal with named Michelle Fawn, who you may have never heard of, but she puts on makeup on YouTube. She's got 1 billion views. You know, to take a traditional movie star or musician and plug them into that audience, or one of your ideas, plug them into that audience, has tremendous reach. And we're talking about what kind of ideas can span both of those.
For me, it's tough because I've thought of so much. One thing I've thought of is the future of radio and how exciting and powerful I think radio can be in a digital world. And in my car, I listen to YouTube channels or Pandora or, you know, but I think there's a huge way to read, you know, radio now encompasses everything that you hear through the vortex of media. And I love, you know, there's a lot of radio in this, you know, what you guys do, and I think the future of radio is very vibrant. But as a show guy and as a content guy, David Enzer and I were talking last night, and I asked him what he was psyched about and he talked about his Farsi audience worldwide is growing and is young, and he thinks is ready for, he wants to serve that audience. And at Nat Geo, Charlie taught me a couple tricks, and one is taking the traditional documentary and using a multi-narrative device. So telling a story that would, in one instance, be a traditional documentary about swamp people, about guys who are gator hunters, and instead tell that story not through one guy's perspective, but 6 different groups. And it allows you to move the story around at a much more rapid pace. And it's a contemporary documentary format that I started to utilize a ton. So I told David I wanted to make Farsi in America, or American Farsi, and I wanted to take, you know, 5 or 6 different stories about the American Farsi diaspora. So a student who's a doctor getting his degree at UCLA, a guy who is in a comedy club in Los Angeles who does comedy in Farsi and reaches his audience. And so tell the story from 4, 5, or 6 different perspectives about different people living the American experience who don't, you know, who aren't from here, and they're getting the ups, downs, and all arounds of the American experience. And I want to do that show.
Thanks. That's
For
great.
you.
We got to do that show. So one last bit of thought before we thank our panelists. When I got here to BBG 14 months ago, one of the things that struck me most profoundly was how alone it feels here, right? In the sense that there's lots of military people going out across the world on behalf of the United States, and it's well publicized, and they come home and to much deserved, you know, parades and acclimates. But there's a lot of journalists in this room and across the world who are fighting an equally important fight for freedom and democracy and human rights. And I was struck when I got here about how alone it feels here, how little Americans know about the great work that's being done here, and about the importance of it. And so one of the board's, you know, goals has been to really kind of connect us back to the United States and connect us back to the people of the United States. And so, you know, just hearing all of you guys, luminaries, I mean, we're very honored to have you here. These are all very busy people who gave up a lot of their time to come down here. Very inspiring to us that you guys would be here and listen to us, and also inspiring to hear you be inspired by them, by us, right? Has been a wonderful experience. So I just want to, Ben, thank you for putting this together, and for all the panelists, just a quick round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. And for the record, I am not pro-piracy, but I am looking forward to my free Mountain Dew. Really quickly, because we're still in an open meeting, I want to just remind everybody the next BBG board meeting will be December 18th here in Washington, D.C. Won't have as exciting panel, but we are going to do a panel on a deep dive on International Broadcasting Bureau. I promise you that will be exciting as well. Because we have an open board meeting, I have to ask any board member whether they'd like to close the meeting. Anybody want to propose that they would close that we adjourn the meeting? Governor Stengel proposes it. Governor Weinstein seconds it. All those in favor, everybody in the room can say aye. Aye. The opposed, no. Thank you guys for coming, and thanks to the panelists for being here.